Shall we start? Are we possible? Sure. Or we wait for something? Next session
काठमाडौँ कलिङ लिटरेचर फेस्टिभलको यो तेस्रो संस्करणको पहिलो दिनको तेस्रो सेसनमा यहाँहरू सबैलाई हार्दिक स्वागत छ। हामी समयभन्दा ढिला भइसकेका छौँ, निर्धारित समयभन्दा 15 मिनेट ढिला भएका छौँ। त्यसरी नै अलिकति हामी यो सेसन थोरै त लम्बिन्छ होला, तर टाइमलाई म्यानेज गरिदिनु हुनेछ भन्ने मैले विश्वास लिएको छु। वेलकम टु द रञ्जित रे। उहाँ चाहिँ नेपालका लागि पूर्व भारतीय राजदूत हुनुहुन्छ। नेपालमा भारतीय राजदूतका रूपमा सेवा गरिसक्नु भएको, मलाई लाग्छ नेपाललाई उहाँले नजिकबाट चिन्नु भएको छ। र उहाँसँग चाहिँ असीम राज मुल्मीले कुराकानी गर्नुहुनेछ। राइटिङ एज एस्पिरेसन टपिक्स छ उहाँहरूको। यो विषयमा चाहिँ कुराकानीलाई अगाडि बढाइदिनका लागि म हार्दिक अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु र हलमा उपस्थित सबै महानुभावहरूलाई हृदयदेखि नै स्वागत।
Hello, thank you. Amish Raj Mulmi, sorry.
सरी, के भन्नुभयो?
Amish Raj
अमिश,
Mulmi.
ओके सरी। र थोरै मैले हजुरलाई 1 मिनेट जस्तो समय लिन्छु, साथीले वेलकम गर्नुहुनेछ, त्यसपछि हामी स्टार्ट गर्छौँ।
सुरु गरे हुन्छ? So we'll do it in English. So हामीले त इङ्ग्लिशमै गर्नु पर्यो नि त। Time also is 45 minutes.
And language? You can ask everyone sitting here.
Is everyone comfortable in English? I know. Yeah, all right. Okay. So we'll do it in English. So is more comfortable in that. So yes, thank you, Kalinga Litfest for having us. A great session to start with. There is a joke here about a diplomat and a journalist going into a bar, but yeah, I don't know that. So yeah, distinguished career. You've been to Nepal several times, even after your tenure, and you've been writing. The last book that you wrote was fantastic, Kathmandu Dilemma. And I think one of the things, the first thing, obviously, the question is, what's the switch like from, let's say, diplomacy, from having a diplomacy job to writing as a, let's say, you want to write a book? So how is it different?
Well, thank you, Amish, and thank you, Kalinga Litfest. And first of all, to the ladies here, I'd like to wish you all a very happy Tej. And in India, today is Ganesh Chaturthi. So the region where I live for part of the year, it's probably the biggest festival. So it's a very happy occasion. And it's always a real pleasure to be in Nepal and meet with Nepalese friends. And actually, you know, Amish is the real writer. I'm only an interloper. I mean, I've only written one book, and I spent my entire life in the diplomatic service. And my experience, you know, the first time I got a cold call from my publisher, Penguin. So I got a cold call one day saying, we want you to do a book. So my instantaneous response was, no way. There's no way I can write a book. There's no question of putting down 60,000-70,000 words in a coherent manner. But, you know, my editor was very persuasive. And then she explained to me, she said, no, it's not so difficult. You know, you're used to writing reports for your government, etc. think of your book, think of the concept, make the chapters, and each chapter is like a long essay. So you can easily do it. So anyway, and then, COVID happened, so there was not very much to do. So that's how this book came out. It was all in my mind. I didn't have to really research very much. So it was basically, my experience of having worked with Nepalese friends for many, many years. And so the research actually came later. Maybe we'll come to that later. But Amish, what is your experience of, as a scholar? And I'm sure it's much more in-depth analysis. I mean, mine is a superficial, cursory kind of look. So it's not, it's not a scholarly work. So what is your experience?
I think you're just underselling yourself. Please pick up Kathmandu Dilemma. I think it's the book on India-Nepal relations. No, but thank you, sir. I think for me, a lot of it was motivated by the idea that, sometimes we have to tell our own stories. I think that is a very important thing, because increasingly you realize that if you don't tell your own story, if you don't tell the story that you have, someone else will end up telling it for you. And so I suppose that's where it started from. In terms of research, in terms of writing, one of the advantages of having a, let's say, not a job is that you can pick up your bag and go travel. And this book allowed me that. It allowed me to see the countries, see Nepal, go most of the the Nepal-China borders, and just see how people were living there. And I think that was very important to me, because I don't think enough of the border issues, not just on the north, but also on the south, they're reflected in our media. They're reflected in our stories that we are seeing, especially because Kathmandu is obviously, it's very Kathmandu-centric. So the view is very, very, let's say, disoriented, right? And beyond, let's say, mountaineering, beyond, issues of climate change, how are people living in the mountains? And that was, I think, one of the core concerns when I was writing my book. And then, of course, the archival research. There is enough material now, right? And both China has also declassified a lot of material, US, India, Nepal also, there's a lot of material around historical relations, not the recent ones. So that obviously helped me quite a bit. But that's where I want to come to. In your book also, you can see that it's grounded in a lot of history, right? And so how was that experience for you? Let's say, like you said, as a diplomat, you don't really, the legacy of history, but you don't have to go into it that much detail. So,
I really like the point that you made about telling stories, because I think, whatever you write really has to be in that form. It has to be anecdotal. It has to be interesting. And that is how it will get an audience. Because, scholarly works are very, very critical, very important. They add to our knowledge. But they're for a niche group of people who are really researching into a particular subject. But storytelling, and in an interesting way, in an anecdotal way, on the basis of people you've met, places you've visited and traveled, I think is very, very interesting for a lay person. And I think that's what I found so fascinating about All Roads Lead North, is that, Amish traveled to all these places and he talks about the human life experiences. Of course, there is a lot of politics, but it's woven around, the story of the Newar community, for instance, in Tibet. It's such a fascinating story. And at least in India, not many people know about it. So it's, I think that's that kind of sort of semi-journalistic, scholarly combination, telling stories, is something that really attracts me. As far as my book is concerned, since I've been dealing with Nepal for almost 20, 25 years, and some of the seminal moments in Nepal's history happened during my tenure, either at headquarters or subsequently as ambassador. So I was just lucky in terms of being associated with, a lot of these changes, the whole, the period from 2002 to 2006, and then, of course, the new constitution. So very, very dramatic changes happened. And, I was in a sense an onlooker, and an empathetic onlooker. And so I wanted to tell this story about, especially for the lay reader, about Nepal. What is Nepal about? What are the struggles? What are the aspirations of the people? not too much grounded in history, but naturally when you then finally write your chapter or your book, you've got to make sure that it's not inaccurate, that it's based actually on. So my kind of, if I confess to you, my research actually came after I wrote the book. So it didn't precede the book. I wrote the book, and then I had to do all this research, and footnotes was very tedious, not something I enjoyed. But that was the process that I followed. So it was like I reversed the process. The research came after I'd written the book. So it was a different way. And I hope very much, for instance, this is my perspective. My book, Kathmandu Dilemma, is my perspective on India-Nepal relations. So it'll be fascinating to get the perspectives of the Nepalese ambassadors, for instance, or the Nepalese, I believe the former Foreign Minister Kamal Thapa has written his book. And, I'm very eager to read it because a lot of it interacted with my time in Nepal. So I think it's so important to have these different perspectives because, you're looking at everything from a certain framework that you have. And, what is objective reality? It can be interpreted in different ways by different people. So it's so important to get the whole picture. And which is why I think, I personally feel that, diplomats who are part of the contemporary history of the relations of their country with another country must record it also for posterity. Because, they're the only people who know exactly what happened. So this is a debatable issue. Because, I had a lot of dilemmas in my mind. If what I'm writing, will it have an impact on the relationship? Will it alienate some people? So there are all those issues. But on balance, I am on the side of more transparency and openness and less secrecy.
Now, one of the things that I also noticed, and you just said that, was that there's a lot of empathy that you have. Obviously, you've interacted so much with Nepali people, during it, before that. And I also know that you traveled a lot while you were here and also after your tenure. So how much does that come into, let's say, the rest of the country? I mean, you've seen the rest of the country as well. And that also, how much does it come into when you are thinking as a non-diplomat, or when you're thinking as a writer?
I would love to write, something about. I've trekked in this beautiful country. I've probably one of the few diplomats who's been to Dolpa, for instance, and the whole Bon communities on the border between Dolpa and Tibet. So it's absolutely fascinating, and I would love to weave that into the stories that I've done. And I think I remember the review that you did of my book, and one of the points you made was, what about this Himalayan aspect? In the overall relationship. And, that is something that has stayed with me and I know you're working a lot on the Himalayan region. And, we as two governments have no forum where our Himalayan communities can meet and interact with each other because all of them have, sort of similar experiences, similar problems, similar concerns. So, the situation, say, in Uttarakhand or in far western Nepal, or Sikkim and the adjoining areas in Taplejung, or even Ladakh, for instance. So there are, a lot of commonalities: climate change, the relationship with Tibet, so Buddhism. So it would be fascinating to work on this. And so, how did you, Amish, sort of pick this theme of the Himalayas? You've really specialized on the Himalayas. And so tell us something about how this happened and what your plans are.
No, I see. I mean, anyone who lives in Nepal, right, like inevitably learns about the mountains, right? And I remember our good friend Sujeev Shakir, he used to say earlier that whenever New York Times writes about Nepal, it's only 3 M's, which is like mountains, Maoists, and monarchy. And now I want to change that. And now whenever New York Times or any Western paper writes about the mountains, it's either mountaineering, it's 3 M's still, but it's mountaineering, or it's misery, which is like national disasters, or it's mysticism, which is monks and all the religious part. And I think these preconceived notions about the Himalaya, right, they sort of ignore these lived communities, the shared histories, the interconnections. So for instance, what you're talking about Ladakh, I mean, not a lot of people here know that Ladakh and Mustang had a very intimate connection where Ladakhi princesses were being married into the Mustang royal family. The Mustang princesses were being married into the royal Mustang Ladakh royal family. So these sort of connections were existing before 1950, right? What happened to these connections? What happened, let's say, where we sort of completely started imagining this Himalayan region as a boundary, as a border that could not be passed, that could not be crossed, because it was never like that. And I think that's where I started. That was my first sort of idea that, all right, if I have, I know that, all of us know the history of, like you said, the Lhasa Nevas who've been trading there. So they used to cross the Himalaya with frequent, let's say, like frequency, right, according to the season. But suddenly now we are told that the Himalayas are this natural barrier, this boundary that you cannot cross. And that seems a little misplaced. That seems a little, let's say, out of place, not just with history, but also with contemporary realities. And I think that was where I started investigating this whole idea of how did this idea of the Himalaya as a remote region, as a, let's say, disconnected, living in isolation sort of emerge from. And you can sort of trace it back to how, let's say, British colonialists started thinking about the Himalaya as, because they did not realize what was happening in the mountains, because it broke, it was anything beyond their expectations of, let's say, how communities live, how societies, let's say, evolve, how states sort of interacted with each other. And I think once, because they could not understand it, and it became the periphery, it became a sort of a, all right, you guys do your own thing in the mountains, as long as it doesn't reach the plains. And that's where this idea of the Himalaya as this, remote, exotic place, a Shangri-La, right? That sort of keeps coming back, and we appropriate it now in any case. I mean, and that's how it is. But okay, now coming back to you, one of the things again about your book is, so as a researcher, a lot of my reading is into the past. It's about looking into these past, let's say, connecting threads, thinking about it in the present. But your book looks a lot to the future. And there are very few books, let's say, even diplomats, they don't do that, right? They're generally writing about the tenure. But your book, you start thinking about the future of India-Nepal relations. And we talked about this quite a bit. How does that thinking come? Like, I mean, are you a natural optimist?
No, but before I go to that, I think one point that struck me in what you said. See, a lot of what we read about our own countries is written by foreigners. A lot of what we read about the Himalayas, for instance, is not written by Indian or Nepali writers. It's written by Americans, it's written by Europeans, and they are known as great explorers and discoverers when actually our people have been living there forever. So, this is the way the world is, I guess. It's changing, but this is the way it is. And that influences our own thinking. And so it's so important, for our own people to write our own histories, about our own societies, because who better to understand this? So I think that is very important. And, I know I've read some of the reviews you've done of Western books on the Himalayas. And, there are certain preconceived notions from which they come. And perhaps, we could discuss that. But coming back to this future-oriented approach. So, so for me, I mean, apart from the fact that, I love Nepal, and, it's really the most fascinating part of my career. But I also know how critical the Nepal-India relationship is for each of our countries, and how important it is to ensure that, we have a stable future in terms of the relationship going forward. I have no doubt in my mind that it is on a positive trend and trajectory. But as in any, such a close relationship, there are bound to be problems. So there are ups and downs, but if you look at it over a period of time, the movement is in the upward direction. And this is what I tell people, back home. Constantly, something happens, India is, we've messed up and we've lost out, and, something that might happen in Nepal and then Nepalese people. So those happen. And I guess at that particular moment in time, that's what consumes your, energy and sort of time. But, things like that do happen in any relationship which is so close. So I think as far as India is concerned, I mean, I don't speak for the government anymore, but as far as I am concerned, my view is that we should focus on things that are really going to assist both our countries in the future. And things like, hydropower cooperation is such a huge, it's a game changer. It's already, I think Nepal exports more than $1 billion worth of energy to India. So, what eventually going to happen, and, if I can use Sham Saran's a phrase which he's been using recently, this web of mutually beneficial interdependencies in the region, where every country is very directly vested in the growth of its neighbor and benefits therefrom. So if you can create this framework, I think then we are on an even keel. And you'll always have ups and downs in terms of the political relations. So I think, I'm not an inveterate optimist, but I think I'm hopefully a realistic optimist. And, there are, of course, constant political changes, but, you have to take those in your stride. So much depends on the local situation here. The global situation is also quite complex. So I do feel optimistic about the relationship between our two countries. So coming back to you, and about this issue that I raised about Western writing on the Himalayas. So what is your perspective, and how do you think we can, because obviously they are strangers, they are foreigners, and however much they may have researched and studied, they don't know our countries and our people the way we do. They don't know our language the way we do. So what is your take on that?
So I would like to sort of define it in two sort of ways, right? One is an old school way of thinking, which is, let's say, the imperial officers, the explorers, the playing the great game. So they had a very different view, which inevitably shaped, let's say, the British Empire's view, the Russians, and even inevitably the Chinks also, how they were thinking about the Himalayas, right? And my contention is that those are not the only views that are available. And then there is a postmodern, let's say post-1950 sort of view of Westerners who are writing on the Himalayas, which is that it is an anthropological view, where they regard the Himalayan civilizations, societies as a place to be studied for, let's say, ethnographies, for, let's say, how people, look at the civilizations, look at the cultures, so unique, it's unique vis-a-vis, let's say, what Western cultures are. But I think in between this, our own, like you said, our own perception has been stuck. So for instance, when our own, let's say, friends, we start writing on the Himalayas, you see that, especially like you see it a lot in travel magazines, where that perception of the Himalaya as this mystical land, like it continues. You read travel writers even from our places, and then you get a sense that they're sort of trying to ape or imitate what Western writers are doing with the Himalayas. And I'm not sure I fully agree with that. I don't think, my contention is that you are simply then parachuting through, right? You're carrying a perception, a preconceived notion, and you're allowing that to shape your views, your, let's say, perception on the Himalaya. And that, it doesn't matter. I think the Himalaya is only one part of it, but I would say the whole of the subcontinent. I think the way the subcontinent is imagined, the way South Asian histories are imagined. Like, for instance, a great one, this is something that I constantly, every time, so the Stimson Center in the DC, they have a South Asia program, and the South Asia program is simply India, Pakistan. So, and then our constant idea is that South Asia is bigger, the hyphenation of other countries or other civilizations with India sometimes does it disservice, but at the same time, you cannot disconnect the larger shared heritage, the larger shared cultures, how we have evolved as people, right? How we have, we were discussing this yesterday itself, that some of the Vedic traditions that are mentioned in the Rig Veda, they are not carried out in India anymore, but they're still happening. We still practice it in Kathmandu Valley. So what does that say about us as, South Asians? I think that sort of the idea of countering existing perceptions, I think that is important to me, while ensuring that the stories that we are telling, they're true to their reality. I mean, they're reflecting reality at one level or another, right? I think we have about 5 minutes. But yeah, on the last, okay, before we open it to questions, just some thoughts I would like. I mean, we've talked a lot about the future, like India Nepal relations. Of course, it's a positive trajectory. But I, for one, would definitely like to see more research collaboration. What do you think? Is there possibilities around this? How do we go about this? Not just, let's say, political research, but also historical research, social research, all of that.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. And, you referred to Stimson Center as, South Asia being defined as India, Pakistan. Obviously, there are Western perspectives, Western interests that need not necessarily coincide with ours. Yeah. So it's on us, I think, responsibility on us to research and understand our neighbors. And that was really one reason I wrote my book, because even in a country like India, which is so close, there are a lot of misconceptions and prejudices and preconceived notions. So it's so important to, for the people, especially neighbors, to understand each other. And I guess in Nepal also there would be, a lot of misconceptions about the reality of India and where India is headed and in what manner. So I think it's very important for us to research our own history and to write about it. And as you said, you spoke about sort of original rituals and documents. I know that, in India, we have this great initiative of digitizing and documenting the ancient manuscripts of our various traditions. And most of these manuscripts are not in the custody of any institution or the government. They are with private temples and individuals. And the same thing. So the idea now is really to see if you can expand this in our South Asian region. And, of course, there are a lot of challenges because people are very possessive about these manuscripts. But if you can come and actually digitize them and preserve them for the future, where they are held, something like that would really be, extremely important. So I've forgotten what.
No, I mean, from what you're saying about these manuscripts, I just remembered that Bori, the Bhandakar Oriental Research Institute, their sort of like essential Mahabharat, I think 2 of their manuscripts come from Nepal. So you can, and the Skand Puran, obviously the oldest existing, let's say, manuscript of the Skand Puran is a Nepali one, right? So I think these sort of exchanges, and of course that's in the historical, let's say, the religious, the cultural sphere. But I think even more, let's say, I mean, more of our engineering students should perhaps go towards India, like more of Indian engineering students should perhaps come here, see the mountains, see, like, I mean, how engineering is done here. For instance, I'm just like, I mean, putting it out there. What, like,
I'm keen on the IT sector.
Yeah, yeah.
This whole digital public infrastructure that we might be discussing in the next session. There's lots of things happening here in Nepal as well. And, we really need to go into some of these areas that will transform our future relationship. So maybe perhaps we can open it.
I think we have time for 2 questions. 2 questions.
Please.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Ek Prasad. My question is, as you said, Westerners write about our mountains, be that in India or Nepal. But again, you have written about Nepali mountains. Isn't that contradictory? Instead of that, you could have written about New Delhi or Goa or Ladakh. That's my question. Thank you.
I don't think Sir is writing about mountains. I am writing about Nepali mountains for now. I might write about Indian mountains, but then someone in India might ask me this question: why am I writing about Indian mountains? Can I not write about Nepali mountains? So yeah.
If I may also add to that, I think, we are a subcontinent and very deeply interconnected. And, there is no such, whatever happens in the Nepalese mountains also impacts the Indian mountains. So I don't think it's so cut and dried as you feel. And absolutely, it's all interlinked, interdependent. And so it's so important that all of us are involved, in what is happening.
Thank you. It was a very interesting session. This is Neeraj. I'm a PhD student at Kathmandu University. A very short question as an aspiring writer myself. Started writing small pieces. How do you both see the role of writing evolving in this digital age? I think Amish would be better.
Are you talking about AI writing, or are
Oh
you
no,
just,
like people are more into these days, less reading books, but more into internet and stuff. So how
no?
do you
I
see-
think, I mean, I, I I don't think good writing will go away. I think a well-researched book, a well-written novel, I think it'll still continue. I don't think. I mean, a couple of days ago, I was at a school where a 10th grader asked me, "Why are you writing in the age of AI?" And I simply told him that, "Do you think an AI can write?" And he was reading at that time, "To Kill a Mockingbird." So an AI will be able to give you a basic template, but characters, situations, humanity, right? The humanity of writing, I don't think that will go away. So as long as we continue to write better books, I think there will always be readers.
Well, let's hope, because one doesn't know where AI is leading, and I know that a lot of young people now are using AI for a lot of things, and I'm told that experts can actually identify whether something is being written using AI or not. But yeah, it seems to be a shortcut, and I hope very much that this writing that we as humans do with emotions and feelings continues.
I think with that, we are done. And thank you so much. Thank you for being a great audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. I would like to request, please, sometimes हजुर एकैछिन बस्दिनु ल म मायाको चिनो चाहिँ प्रदान हुँदै साथीलाई यता ल्याइदिनका लागि अनुरोध गर्न चाहन्छु र यसलाई हस्तान्तरण गरिदिनका लागि म देवराज मोहन्ती सरलाई बोलाउन चाहन्छु. आई वुड लाइक टु रिक्वेस्ट देवराज मोहन्ती सर टु ह्यान्ड ओभर द टोकन अफ लभ. यसपछिको हाम्रो सेसन allows for women differences between the constitution and treatment भन्ने शीर्षकमा रहेको छ. युवराज सुवेदी, सिकेलाल, इन्दु तुलाधर हाम्रो प्यानलिस्ट हुनुहुन्छ भने सुदर्शन गिरीले यसलाई मोडिएटर गर्नुहुनेछ. म यो पनि यहाँहरूलाई जानकारी गराउन चाहे र यो महत्त्वपूर्ण सेसनका लागि नेपालका लागि पूर्व भारतीय राजदूत रञ्जित रे र लेखक अमिश राज तुलाधरलाई धन्यवाद र धन्यवाद देवराज मोहन्ती सरलाई पनि. थ्याङ्क यू अल अफ यू. थ्याङ्क यू. दक्षिण एसिया क्षेत्र खास गरिकन नेपाल, भारत, भुटान र श्रीलङ्का लगायतका क्षेत्रको साहित्य, सङ्गीत, नाटक, राजनीति लगायतका विविध विषयहरूमा छलफल विमर्श गर्ने हेतुले सुरु गरिएको काठमाडौँ कलिङ लिटरेचर फेस्टिभल यो चाहिँ एसएफसी प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठान काठमाडौँ र कलिङ लिटरेरी फेस्टिभल भारतको संयुक्त आयोजनामा भइरहेको छ. आज हामी 2 दिने साहित्य उत्सवको पहिलो दिनमा छौँ र पहिलो दिनमा हामीले 3वटा सेसनहरू सकिसकेका छौँ. अब हामी चौथो सेसनमा प्रवेश गर्नेछौँ. वक्ताहरूलाई मैले सबैजनालाई देखिरहेको छैन. म यहाँ हाम्रा स्वयंसेवक साथीहरू र आयोजक साथीहरूसँग समन्वय गरेर जति सक्यो छिटो त्यो सेसनलाई अगाडि बढाउने पनि यहाँहरूलाई जानकारी गराउन चाहन्छु. र एकैछिन 2 मिनट समय यहाँहरूलाई ब्रेक बाहिर जानुपर्ने भए पनि कृपया गरेर आउन सक्नुहुन्छ. रेस्टरुम जानुपर्ने भए पनि. र हाम्रो सेसन भनेको अब चाहिँ यो महिलाहरूका लागि कानुनको चाहिँ संविधानमा भइरहेको व्यवस्था र हामीले गरिरहेका प्रयोगका बिचमा के फरक भइरहेको छ, के त्यो अन्तर छ भन्ने विषयमा त्यो पेरिफेरीमा रहेर संवाद हुनेछ. र हामीसँग संवादमा युवराज सुवेदी, सिकेलाल, इन्दु तुलाधर रहनुहुनेछ भने सुदर्शन गिरीले यसलाई सहजीकरण गर्नुहुनेछ यो सेसनलाई.